Hey everyone, Path to Eternity here. It's been a while since I put out a video, but in preparation for Aradune and Rizlona, I've been working on a Shaman trigger package for classic EverQuest. This video is to give it some attention and take a look under the hood. 2 weeks from today, I plan on playing my 4th TLP Shaman, this time on the new Rizlona server, and this is the package I'll be using at launch. I'm putting a link to this package in the description below so it's easy to find, and I'll also link a few GINA guides I've made. Before we dig into this package, I want to give a quick rundown of how I have GINA set up. This video isn't a guide for setting up GINA, but I thought it might help to give some context to this package and maybe give you some ideas for customizing your own GINA experience. If you've never used GINA before and you're interested in a tutorial for setting it up, leave a message in the comments so I know there's interest. You may also need to adjust your in-game filters to filter out spells other players are casting. For now though, let's take a look at what I've got going on. As you can see, I've already got 2 characters loaded in here, one from Finnegal, where I raided for several years, and another from Test, which is always handy for testing. There's not much to see on the sharing tab, but this is where you'll import any packages that you download. About 3 years ago, I put out a guide on overlays and categories, which I'm not attempting to replace in this video, but since I've expanded on my setup a good bit since then, we'll review a couple of details. I still recommend you fire up GINA and that video side by side for a helpful walkthrough on customizing your overlays and categories. That guide will be one of the links I put in the description below. Anyway, on the Overlays tab, you'll see that I've created 1 text overlay and 4 timer overlays. I only use 1 text overlay, and I've named it Center because it sits right in the center of my screen and pops up any text triggers in bright yellow, usually with an accompanying audio trigger. There aren't a ton of text pop-ups in this package, but there are a few. The timer overlays are the real engine of this package, and they're interwoven pretty tightly with the categories, which you'll see in a moment. I've named them red plus yellow, blue, purple and green, and red, and I have them lined up towards the top of my screen from left to right. These names will make more sense once we look at my categories, but I recommend you either copy my setup or create your own. What you don't want is all of these timers piling into one single timer overlay, which will just leave you overwhelmed and frustrated. For my categories, I've set up a total of 6. In their names, I've noted them as left or right, described them with a color, and named them with a kind of tag for what the category is about. The left, right, and color indications are my own reminders to help me when I'm tying triggers, overlays, and categories together. If this doesn't make any sense, just pause through this section a couple of times and copy mine for now. Some of these won't be used in this package, but will be used in future releases. So here's one on the left, which is blue timers. Here's one on the left for red timers, one on the left for yellow timers, one on the right for green, one on the right for purple, and one on the right for red. And you see the descriptions in there as well. Okay, with that long introduction out of the way, we're about ready to take a look at what's actually in the package. My goal with creating this package was to create timers and triggers for any relevant spell a shaman can cast in classic EverQuest. So the focus of this package is on level 1 to 50 spells. I do have several pre-existing 50 plus triggers in here, which may work or may not work. Or if they do work, they may not be quite standardized to the rest of these. I decided to leave them in because many of them do work right out of the box, They may give some useful ideas about other triggers you want to create for yourself. And eventually, I'll be incorporating them into this package anyway, so I wasn't compelled to take them out of this package. Let's take a look at what's in this package. I've gone back and forth a couple of times on how to organize these triggers, and I think I've settled on using the same system that EQ uses in the spell gem menu. I think it would be easy to improve on the in-game system, but for our purposes, it gives us a quick system to copy. Plus, if you're looking for a trigger, this may help you find it more easily. The major groups using this setup are damage over time, heals, HP buffs, regen, statistics buffs, utility beneficial, and utility detrimental. As you can see, I've also got a group at the top here for non-spells, which doesn't really come into play in classic EQ. This is where AAs and clickies will live. The triggers in this group may work, but I didn't spend any time on them specifically for this release. So you can take a look at them and see what's in there. But let's start with our damage over time group. Here we have our disease, magic, and poison groups. You'll see some higher level spells in each of these. All of our disease spells use the same trigger text in Classic, so they are all just one big trigger here. I'd like to find a better way to name the triggers without discarding this spell level and spell name information, but this is what I've got for now. Let's open up this trigger. In the search box, we see this trigger text that all of these spells use, and I have led with this caret to sanitize the trigger text. Adding this at the beginning of any trigger basically prevents someone else from forcefully firing your trigger, which could be very annoying in game if they're trying to mess with you. The equivalent at the end is this $, which isn't very important for most of the triggers, but it is occasionally relevant, so it's a habit I've started to try to get into, and you'll see that in some of these triggers. All of my triggers use regular expressions because this leading caret is part of that, so this box will always be checked for regular expressions. Also, all of my triggers use fast check. If you come across any triggers that seem to be having fast check problems, please let me know in the comments so I can investigate them. For all of my detrimental spells, I choose this right red detrimental effect mine category, which I created earlier on the categories tab. And this puts the timer onto my far right overlay with a red timer bar. On the actual timer tab here, I've selected a countdown timer with a timer name of disease followed by the name of the target in parentheses. You can see that there's an S in curly brackets in the search text as well as here in the timer name. And this means that the timer will pull the name from the text, so it's always accurate in your timer. I have set this timer duration to 3 minutes as a general starting place, pretty much across the board on this package. You'll have to set your own durations, as there's no way for GINA to know the actual durations of any of our in-game timers. For most timers, these will change anyway based on the spell that we're using, what level we are, and of course later on focus effects and AAs. So this is something that you'll have to develop a habit of updating. When you level up, you get a new spell. There are changes in game that will change the durations of these timers. I have these triggers set to restart the current timer if you cast the same spell on the same target. The other option is to start a new timer or do nothing. You may want to play with this setting based on what you're doing in game. The restart option is better for tracking refreshes when you don't have multiple targets with the same name. But starting a new timer would be better if you do expect to have multiple targets with the same name. I also have end early text down here for each trigger in this package. For most of these triggers, they'll end early if the target dies, either because you killed it, someone else killed it, or it just died. For example, someone dots the target, then the owner of that dot dies, and then the dot kills the target, so the owner isn't around to get credit for the kill. I believe what usually happens is the target just dies. That's the text. So here we have me killing something, something being killed by somebody else, and then that thing just dying on its own. I've also built into most of these a line of end early text that will match if you make a hotkey that emotes /em goes brain dead period. This will say in game that you go brain dead, and GINA will clear all the timers with this end early text. You'll find this helpful if you've somehow accomplished a bunch of garbage timers that you'd like to go away immediately instead of waiting for them to expire on their own. I also have a single entry for Infectious Cloud here, which you probably won't use because it's terrible, but just in case you do, it should create a timer correctly. It's an AE spell, so if you love breaking messes, this is the one for you. The magic group is our line of curses, which we don't get for quite a while, so everything in this group is just a bonus for you. We're not going to look closely at the poison group as it's set up just like disease, but here you go. I also have a spot for duration heals, which will start to become relevant in Kunark, but for now this is just marked for future release. For HP buffs, we have our single inner fire spell here, the only one under HP type 1, which is our first example of a worn-off timer. Instead of tracking the duration of the buff like we did the dots above, this creates a timer when the spell wears off, prompting you to rebuff your target. I've put this under the worn off category, and you can see the rest of this is set up just like the previous triggers. The main difference is instead of the end early text being the target dying, this timer will end early if you refresh the buff on the target. You can also clear it with the brain dead text. As a quick pro tip, Inner Fire is our cheapest abjuration spell. You'll need abjuration later for resist buffs, so this is a great cheap low level option to practice with. Next is our Talisman HP Buffs, which are set up pretty much the same way. The worn off hint says HP with the target's name in parentheses. We get 2 Regen Spells in Classic, and this trigger will help you refresh it when it wears off. At this point, I'm going to start moving a lot faster through these as we're just browsing through the triggers now, and there's no need to take the time to dissect them anymore. But of course, feel free to pause at any time to take a closer look at how I've built these, and if you run into one that you have a question with, just leave a note in the comments and I will do my best to answer. Under Statistic Buffs, we have our buffs for Agility, Armor Class, Attack, Dexterity, Resist buffs, Stamina, and Strength. You won't use the Armor Class buffs very often because they don't stack with the Cleric AC buff. But if you're ever grouping with a Cleric, it's an often overlooked AC buff your tank will appreciate. So I went ahead and included it in here and thought I'd make a special note of that. The attack group is for our avatar line of spells, so those will be wrapped up later, although some of the spells in here should work right now. You can take a look at what we've got here. The resist buffs are broken down by resist. Many of these groups, as you see, only have a single trigger in them today, but I'll wind up adding more triggers to them as different expansions add different kinds of spells to these groups over time. So it might look goofy right now, but I have done this on purpose. Under Utility Beneficial, we have our Combat Innates, Haste, Invisibility, Miscellaneous, and Move Speed. Combat Innates, Invisibility, and Move Speed don't pertain to Classic, although I believe all of these are working properly. For Haste, I track both the duration of the spell and I want a timer reminding me to refresh it. Most melees don't even like to see their haste buff start flashing, let alone drop off. So I try to stay on that one very closely and then also have a timer reminder if it does wear off. If you're wondering why I have worn off timers instead of just a worn off pop-up and maybe an audio trigger, the answer is that I do keep a worn off audio trigger in my general triggers. But while raiding or in other fast-paced situations, I found that I don't do the best at remembering what buff wore off what player, so having a little 3-minute timer to remind me helps. I used to keep the timer at 6 minutes, but I've cut it down to 3 to see how that goes for me. I also have some triggers in here for Enduring Breath. Just in case I find myself using the spell, I'd like a very clear visual on how much time is left on it, plus extra triggers when it wears off in case I'm not paying attention. Under Utility Detrimental, we have our final group of triggers. I doubt you'll be using blind, but I included it anyway. Same with our charm animal spells. We have our disempowering line, our root line, and our slow line of spells. Our other debuffs here, including root, will all put a timer on your screen so you can refresh them appropriately if needed. Charm and root can both break early, so they have unique end early text, which I can show you. So if this breaks, it'll tell you it'll go away right away. And if you happen to be using charm, that will go away right away as well. So there's certainly a lot going on here, and some of this may seem like overkill, but I want to build these out through each expansion, so it was important to me to get the foundation right and get enough data in this system to see what I'd like the overall patterns to be. I'll be testing these triggers on test while I wait for Rizlona, and then I'll be using them as I grind my way to 50. In closing, I'd like to emphasize that if you use these triggers, I'd really appreciate your feedback. Tell me in the comments what works for you and what does not work for you. If you find any errors, please put that in the comments too so I can fix them in a future release. Also, if there are any custom triggers you need, mention that with some details in a comment and I'll see what I can do. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, let me know by liking it. If you know anyone else who would like this video, let them know by sharing it. And if you like this kind of content, let me know by subscribing. You can find more content I've put together on my site, pathtoeternity.pro, and very soon you'll be able to find me streaming again on Twitch at twitch.tv/pathtoeternity.